After months of angry demonstrations, Israel's Prime Minister Binyamin Netanyahu finally announced he would delay the judicial reforms, which have divided the country.
כשיש אפשרות למנוע מלחמת אחים בהידברות, אני כראש ממשלה לוקח פסק זמן להידברות.
Those reforms would have given his government the power to overrule Israel's Supreme Court and rule with fewer checks and balances. So, is Israeli democracy now safer?
So the first reason to be hopeful is that this has shown that Israel's democracy is really working. You've had sort of people coming out on the streets in defense of democracy, protest against a set of judicial reforms, which you would think are just very sort of geeky and boring, but really what secular and liberal Israelis saw in this was an attack on their democracy, an attempt to weaken the Supreme Court and to take away the independence of the judges. So hundreds of thousands of people came out protesting against this. We saw senior officials in the government, we saw members of reserve units and elite army and Air Force units, and this kind of coalition of elite really forced the government to back down. They have pushed back an effort by a frankly authoritarian-leaning government to try to really shackle the courts and to weaken checks and balances on the government. Now that's very rare. A second reason to be hopeful is that this really creates an opportunity, and frankly the first one in almost 75 years of Israel's history, to sit down again and have proper, frank conversations about these very real issues that have been infecting Israel's politics. So in some ways, the original sin in Israel's legal system was that it never got a constitution. It was meant to in 1948, its Declaration of Independence promised a constitution, but the 120 people who sat down to write the constitution immediately started bickering. So David Ben-Gurion, the founding prime minister, just sort of kicked this into the long grass and said, we don't need a constitution, we'll deal with it at a later date. And since 1949, there's been this kind of muddled legal situation, not just with these kind of narrow issues of sort of who sits on the court, but also broader issues about what kind of society Israel wants to be and how it balances sort of the religious aspirations and religious law with the desires of the other half of the population to lead secular, liberal lives that recognize gay rights and other kind of liberal values. You cannot have a situation where roughly 50% of the population sees the courts as an unelected institution that is out to thwart them, and the other 50% of the country sees the efforts to resolve that as a fundamental attack on democracy and their rights. So the only way to resolve this is through sitting down and having a proper conversation. The challenge on both sides will be to be willing to have a real conversation, to accept compromises and saying this is a reasonable middle path that holds the country together. As much as I'm optimistic about what's just happened and the fact that we saw this real sort of democratic moment, my worry is that the divisions in Israeli society are so deep. This is a battle for the sort of heart and soul of what Israel is going to be. So in the short term, there is a real danger that if the legislative agenda just continues as it is, we will have hundreds of thousands of people back out on the streets. And over the longer term, I think that this kind of festering will just deepen the antagonism. So there is a real danger that this kind of just continues to rip Israel apart unless it is addressed properly now. Thank you for watching. To get more of our coverage of Israel, please click on the link and don't forget to subscribe.